Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Our Future 101, and today we've got a special guest here with us, Michael. Why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
So my name's Michael Snape. I am previously the legislative assistant for MPP Randy Hillier, I would say probably one of the most active people in the whole freedom movement realm. He's been on this fight since pretty much the very beginning, and I was lucky enough to be on that ride for the last 2 years.
Sweet. Well, it's great to have you on the podcast today. It's going to be really good to get some opinions about some of the things that are going on. And so first of all, we do have an upcoming election coming up, the provincial election, the municipal election that's happening in a couple of months. So I wanted to get your opinion on that first. What do you think is the political stance that Canada is in? And what would you suggest for the citizens to do and what to look for?
Suggestions, that's a tough one because the political situation, whether we're talking provincially or municipally, is pretty crappy. If we're thinking about municipal, I mean, like, what are your options today? You got the Ontario Party, which is hyper social conservative, or you have the New Blue Party, which, operates with dirty tactics. Mm-hmm. Like, we know that Randy was originally trying to get some coalitions going and get some parties going so we would actually have a freedom candidates to go up against. But at the end of the day, it's just everyone was attacking each other. No one wanted to play ball with one another. And we're kind of left in a situation where it's like when the election rolls around, it's just going to be, who do we prefer, having an NDP government or do we prefer to have a Liberal government? Because with how much everyone doesn't like the Conservatives today, I don't see them having any real chance of holding power. I mean, that's not to say that I would like the Conservatives to hold power. From what we have seen from the last 2 years, they didn't do much of a better job than what the Liberals or NDP would have done. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can just look at the federal Liberals, look at the craziness that they've gone through. But I don't know if I have any real suggestions. The options are slim. Like, just vote for the local candidate that you believe you stand with. That's probably the best advice I can get. And that stands true for even municipal politics, because municipal politics isn't like provincial or federal. There's no party system. You are voting for a rep in your area. He's going to go to City Hall and he's going to represent you. Mm-hmm. So especially in municipal government, make sure you're voting for who you think represents you the best. That's really the biggest suggestion I can give.
So those the candidates that represent your interests and what you would like to see in your area, basically. So you're going to be looking at local things and figuring out which of the candidates are going to fulfill your wishes, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite simple, I guess. But a lot of people don't practice these things, especially students, since we're.
No, well, most people don't pay attention to the political system at all. It's like either my parents voted for this and I hate them, so I'm going to vote for the opposite, or my parents voted for this and I like them, so I'm going to vote the same way. That's how most people vote, and it's disappointing. And that's one of the issues with the party system, is because you're not voting for somebody, you're voting for a party. And when a party gets a majority, it's no longer the individuals in the party that have the power. It's whoever's really helping get them reelected, and that's going to be, whoever the premier is or prime minister is. That's the one benefit that we have, though, working with the municipal government, is that the only people they're responsible for is themselves. Mm-hmm. And you actually have some sway. Now, do municipal politics matter in the grand scheme? Because you cannot, overturn what's happening on the federal or provincial level. But at least you can have a government locally that's going to, favor your business interests or favor your school interests, or at least put pressure where pressure needs to be put.
Mm-hmm. So the municipal governments still have some sort of sway in terms of how, the policies are run, even if it is under federal or provincial legislation.
To a certain extent. So the one thing that a municipal government can't do is overwrite what the federal and provincial laws are. Mm-hmm. All they can really do is just dictate maybe how they get applied. They do have a little bit of control over the police and how it gets enforced. Like, for example, when they had the mask mandates and these limitations, I think it was Peel region came out and said, we're just not going to really come out and enforce it. And that wasn't technically the municipal government, because the police are completely independent. But we all know someone was leaning on somebody that was encouraging the police not to be as heavy-handed as maybe Toronto was, or was Toronto bylaw. Toronto bylaw was insane.
Yeah, the Toronto bylaw was crazy, and it was enforced heavily too. But I think in Brampton, which is part of Peel, right?
Yeah.
It was it was a lot lighter.
Peel is, I think, Brampton, Mississauga, and I think there's one other region that covers it.
And so, just to follow up with that, I wonder if, like, because a lot of people think that we just need a politician, or we need somebody who will, make things better for us. And is that even possible with the situation we're in? Is it possible to, bring back conservatism, bring back those values of traditional family, or of freedom, or individual responsibility, small government, all of those things? Is it possible to bring that out by simply voting correctly? Or
if there was enough opposition on the civil level, then probably. Like, the fact of the matter is, and this is something that, Randy really embedded in my head, is that, politics is downstream from culture. And if you want to change politics, you have to change your local communities, the people around you, the people that are voting for the candidates. Because it doesn't matter what I vote, or what you vote, or what anyone votes personally. It matters what your community believes. Because if you vote conservative, or you vote libertarian, or whatever you vote for, and the rest of your community is very toxic and doesn't really care, a number of them probably won't vote. And then a number of them are just going to vote for what I said earlier, whatever their parents did or didn't vote for. So I'm not convinced that you can vote your way out of this issue. Not right now. Not until we solve the cultural issues that we're facing.
Right. So the first thing is to go to your local communities and instill those values of conservatism that was present earlier, decades earlier, right? And it's been diminishing now, and that's something we'll talk about as well. But you mentioned that we cannot change this by simply voting and doing nothing else. That we first have to change the culture. We first have to go to our local communities, local businesses, friends, families, all around the community, and change their perspectives, and basically convince them that, hey, small government is a good thing, and individual responsibility is a good thing. And then, obviously, all of those people will vote the way that you want to, and the way that everybody would like to do.
Yeah. I mean, the term, even though I'm not a big fan of the global idea, but the idea from local to global makes a huge sense. You have to start where you are, and only when you change what's happening in your local area can you even consider things growing beyond that. Like the biggest thing we have to also remember is, like, a lot of the craziness that we saw over the last 2 years is the result of local decisions. You had some regions of Ontario where there was very little enforcement. Most people lived normal lives. No one really cared. Some storefronts were even resistant. But in other parts of the province, it was insane what we were going through. So just that alone proves that if you have a local community of people that can come together and be on the same page and want to support each other and help alleviate the fears that everyone is having, then you can see this, progress and actually have ideas change. Because the fact of the matter is this: we're not going to see a great conservative revolution. But what we can hope to see is at least a reignition of political interest in people. Because I would be perfectly content if we had some conservatives and some liberals and some NDPers and some libertarians and people sprinkled all around, because the diversity of ideas means that we're going to actually have a good debate going on in government. The problem is right now is we're so monolithic. It's all conservative, or it's all liberal, or it's all NDP. Like, that was never the intention of our political system. The initial intention was you elect your representative goes, and they're going to speak for you. And that's it. That was it. So you would have so many differing opinions and so many differing ideas. And yes, they would form coalitions. A group of people that share general similar ideologies will form a coalition and form government and do all that type of stuff.
Right.
But that's not how it works anymore. It's just, I'm voting for a party, and the party dictates, which we have to remember, parties are corporations. They're also thinking about their bottom line. Mm-hmm. They're going to make the best decisions they can to make sure that they just stay in power. So it's funny because we make fun of populism in North America, but we've been populist for a long, long time. It's not Trump that was the first populist candidate or Maxime the first populist. No, all these parties are populist. If we want to go back to where we actually are dealing with local issues, you need to vote for what you believe in and integrate yourself in the community so that everyone in your community is on the same page.
Okay. And you mentioned about spreading spreading the power, right, to the local level, and not concentrating it within the one party or one elected official that is going to dictate how things go. Why is it so important to spread the power to the local municipalities or the local provincial governments? Why is it so important to do that rather than concentrate all the power on the one party or the one person deciding it, like Trump or Ford, right? Yeah. Why do you think it's important for citizens to consider that? Because many people ask, oh, why not? I would rather have Trudeau make all the decisions for me.
Well, the thing is it really boils down to what is your political philosophy. Because if you believe in that Trudeau should be making all the decisions for you, then obviously you're not going to agree with what I just put forward, because you want basically authoritarianism. Yeah. You want someone that's just going to get the job done, quote unquote, and push the agenda that they see fit. But if you want, actual democracy, or at least some sort of representational system, if you want the freedom to make your own choices, what you actually want government to be is as disorganized, as unable to come to decisions as possible. Because you want them to have to debate. You want them to have to take time. You want them to have to consider all the options before they come to a consensus. Rather than the consensus has already been made by the party, so we're going in that direction. Yeah. And yeah, things take longer to get done. Fine. Yeah. But at least I don't need to worry about what we just went through the last 2 years. We would never have seen this type of overreach if they had to debate in the House all these decisions. But they really didn't. You had a uniparty, the Conservatives. They made all their choices. They just forced them through. And only a handful of MPPs actually decided to break ranks. Why? Because all politicians largely care about nowadays is just getting reelected.
Right. And I mean, we see this a lot. Like, I watch some, I'm not too into the political sense, which is terrible, and I am getting more into it now, and I really want to participate in the upcoming elections. But and I started looking at like Erin O'Toole and him as a leader of the Conservatives, and it was mentioned that previously he was talking about small government, and he was talking about all of these amazing things that we're talking about right now that we want, and having the power distributed throughout the country. And then he did a 180 and did exactly the opposite of what he was going to do. And like he was talking about banning the gun bill by the Liberals. He just went 180 and did the same thing. And then with the carbon tax, same stuff. So it's like, I wonder if these politicians, especially in the Conservative Party, are even, are they just saying these things to get elected as part of the conservative movement, and then they're just doing a complete 180 because the culture is different and they just want to get reelected?
Yeah.
Like that's the way I see things, is they don't really care about what they're going to do as a job, right? In terms of like, okay, I really believe in these things and I really want this to get done. They don't care about that. All they care about is getting to be in power, to be elected, and to have that sort of position, I guess.
Yeah, well, when your goal is to get the majority of your party reelected and make sure that the bottom line of your party is met, That's how you're going to act when you're in government. You're going to do everything in your power to sustain that. But yeah, specifically with Ford, it's like obviously he knew that if he didn't get new voters out to vote for him, which largely the people on the more further right side of the spectrum are very disenfranchised, he needed to speak like them, and he needed to talk like them, and he needed to put out the messages like them. So he got all these new voters, plus all the conservative voters, plus all the disenfranchised liberal voters in the last election, and basically it was a landslide for him. If he didn't talk like that, it's possible he could have still won. It just probably would have been a minority government.
Right. But when they do come to power, the thing is they don't, their actions don't follow their words, which is really unfortunate because a lot of people trusted in that. And a lot of people voted for that thinking, oh, we're going to have, a dispersed power, we're going to have small government, and we're not going to have these infringements on our lives, and we can conduct business, we can buy and sell, and everything's going to be dandy. But none of that shit happened. All the things that they promised, everything just went exactly the opposite, the way the Trudeau speaks, the way the other liberal politicians speak, even though they're not even in power.
Yeah. Well, when your party gets elected by the fact that you got a lot of disenfranchised liberals to put you in power, you're obviously going to lean more towards that. Like, how many times since Ford got into power has he used "we're progressive conservatives"?
Yeah.
Like, progressivism, that's a whole nother topic.
And you mentioned that the importance of having debate in government and in the legislatures and having difference of opinions. But now what's recently been going on is that everybody's talking about is this bill C-36 that is banning hate speech. How do you think that can affect the conditions in which politicians are going to speak and the way they are going to phrase their things and the way their opinions are going to be swayed based on this bill?
Okay, so this is something we have to remember about politicians. Politicians aren't completely 110% not under the same rules as everybody else, but they do have a lot more leniency when they're in the House.
Okay.
So when they're in the House, they can talk however the hell they want. And they're going to talk however the hell they want. And that's good. So Bill C-36 is not going to really affect what's happening in the House. It's going to be what happens outside the House. What do they say on social media? What are they willing to post? Who are they willing to talk to? And that's going to become a big concern, because what we're actually doing with Bill C-36 is we're going to create more insular politicians that are less likely to connect with their community because their community has what is defined as radical views, and they're going to actually be more insular to whatever the party's telling them, because they'll be afraid of associating with anyone that has hate speech, whatever that gets defined as. So it's a scary bill.
Yeah.
But I mean, the fact of the matter is the Liberals have the support of the NDP. It doesn't matter how loud we are, how frustrated we are, how angry we are. The likelihood it's going to pass is pretty high. And all we can do is just practice noncompliance. Who cares? Let them pass it. I don't care. I'm not going to change how I talk. I'm not going to live in fear of what they do, because I know it's wrong. I know it's unjust. I know it contradicts our human rights, especially with just how we should have our speech unfiltered by and large. So let them. I'm not going to be afraid. Make some noise with your senators. Make some noise with your MPs. Make sure that you're not invisible, but don't think that Bill C-36 passes and you're immediately going to start filtering yourself. Because a bill is only as powerful as if they can enforce it. And if enough people are willing to say, screw you, you'll see how quickly that bill ends up disappearing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, non-compliance is the only thing that's ever really worked with these things, because then it's not enforced, it's not used, nobody does it, so it's like, who cares if it's there, right? Yep. And that's what we have to practice, and that's what's worked in terms of like even mandating the third shot. It was never mandated, at least not yet, because not enough people have taken it.
Yep.
And people were just kind of like, no, this is where I draw the line. And this is why it hasn't been mandated, it hasn't been pushed yet.
Yeah.
Of course, that's probably something that's coming up in the future. We don't know, it's all speculation, but at the moment, that is something that's worked. And it's just because people were non-compliant about it. Now, same thing with this bill. It's like, fuck it, pass it and see what happens. Like,
yeah, basically. Like, that's how government has always operated. It's, let's push a little here, see how society responds. If society responds well, then we're going to push a little more and see how society responds. Oh, they get resistant? Okay, we're going to move back a little bit. Wait a year, wait a couple months, and then we're going to push a little harder again. Like, they obviously have their agendas and they want to keep growing their power. That's all government has been doing since the beginning. Why do you think there's revolutions eventually at some point? Because the government has gained too much power and they want to basically hit the reset button. It doesn't mean we can't hit the reset button politically. It's just, if you want to get there, you have to first start at where you're locally at. Start with your community, start with your family, have these conversations, and keep pushing back no matter what. As soon as we stop pushing back, especially right now with what we're seeing with the mandates lifting and all this sort of stuff, our silence and our compliance and our going to restaurants and living a normal life and seeming like everything is normal is just opening the door for them to just push a little bit harder when, everyone's done the summer term. Like, we saw this already, 3 times? At least 2 times.
At least 2 times.
And I don't know why people are convinced that there's something different today.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that things are coming off provincially in terms of the mandates, but they haven't been banned. They're just being put on pause, like at the universities.
Yeah.
Every university is slowly starting to say, okay, we're putting these things on pause, but we still recommend you getting the 3rd and the 4th dose if you're eligible. And York University just put out a statement recently talking about that, but it's like, people don't recognize that. When we talk to students on campus and we tell them, hey, these mandates are likely to be coming back in the fall. Why do you think that we're still here? Why do you think we still talk about this stuff? And they just ignore it. They say, oh, you guys are, the mandates are lifted, so why are you still here? That's their question at the moment. And it's like, because nothing's changed.
No. Nothing has changed, and if we just act like things have changed, then we're just going to get hit again even harder. The thing is that what we're seeing, whether we're talking about universities or whether we're talking about our family homes or we're talking about just our local neighborhoods, the fact of the matter is there's no more community. Like, the York community is whoever has the loudest microphone at the moment. That's all it is. Whoever is making the loudest noise on Reddit or making the loudest noise in one of their community forums, they're the ones that runs what the community is. And all the people that are usually good and moral and honest don't want to create a kerfuffle, so they aren't loud. And we forget that some of the quietest voices are the most reasonable ones, and we need to listen to those more. But at the same time, it's like, if you want to see things improve, if you want to see things get better, it's going to require more than just showing up. It's going to require you talking to your friends, talking to your families, talking to your classmates. Even if they push against you, you have to seem like the bigger person. You have to seem like the mature one in the conversation, and you need to lead by example, because unless we can rebuild community, and I don't mean friggin' online communities, that's not real. Real communities where you're friends with people at your school, or you're friends with your neighbors, or you actually have respect for your family members. Until we can solve those problems, we're not even going to be able to deal with anything.
So it's important to go to your local business and shop there instead of going to the huge Walmart and picking up your groceries there. It's important to go to these little coffee shops and making friends over there and talking about these issues and inviting them for a coffee or speaking to them and doing all of the things that we used to do back in the
community
day.
Barbecues. Where have those gone? The only community barbecues you have, it's like, 5 of my friends from completely outside my neighborhood who I used to know a few years ago have come down to the community barbecue. It's like, but That's not a community barbecue. That's your friend's barbecue.
Yeah.
We need people from our local communities. We need to start talking to our business owners. We need to start talking to our neighbors again. We need to talk to our local teachers and our local trustees and our local counselors and all this sort of stuff, because that's the only way we can actually get people to start coming together again. Like, that is so vital, and that's what we've lost over these 2 years. And there's so much fear to come together. Mm-hmm. But, now's the perfect opportunity. If the mandates have lifted, what's stopping you?
Yeah, the summertime, good weather.
Yeah, bring more people together.
Get people together and get people, tell your stories to people. That's another thing, is that we have a lot of students who have incredible stories about what they went through during COVID. What they went through, with the adverse reactions, and how the university has been handling it. It's pretty ridiculous. And we've seen it in our previous podcasts, but it's a lot of those students are not willing to speak. Like, we just had at our recent event at York University, we had a student come up to us, and he was just, he spoke to me on the phone before, and he was telling me the whole story of how, he had an adverse reaction, the university still de-enrolled him, and his doctor told him that he has to end up in the hospital basically for him to get an exemption. All of these crazy things. And when I mentioned, come on the podcast, speak about it. Yep. His friends don't even know. Yeah. And he's afraid to tell his friends because he thinks that they're just going to leave.
Are they really friends?
But exactly. Are they really your friends? Are they really going to, support you during hard times? Or are they just kind of acquaintance, like party buddies or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's what people are so afraid of these situations these days, because the institutions, the government, the social media propaganda has infiltrated these areas of the family, right? There's a lot of families that are torn apart. There's a lot of communities that are torn apart. And I don't really know anybody in my community. Nobody really wants to make a connection. And It's like everybody is just kind of their own thing. Yep. They just kind of live in their own bubbles. They might be a little activists online, but other than that, it's all gone. And so then when you try to gauge the opinion of the community, it's like, well, what's the only opinion is out there? And that's social media and mainstream media.
Yeah, which is curated, so you're only getting the opinion that they want you to hear. Exactly.
And then it makes you feel like, oh my God, everybody thinks this way, then I must do the same. Yeah. And it's just kind of conformity over there.
It's going to be a tough hill to climb, because we have to do some things that even I find discomforting. It's like, for the person that we were talking about at York, it might have to start with, hey, let's get a coffee. Mm-hmm. And it sounds so simple, but at the same time, it's daunting. Asking him, let's go get a coffee, let's talk. Let's get to know each other. Hey, why don't you come over to this social event? Or why don't we do this? Or hey, I have my friends doing this. It's trying to bring people in and bring people close and get them trusting. And then when you have that trust, maybe they will come on the podcast. Maybe they will decide to speak. But until we can start making these personal connections, this is something that I've been getting very frustrated with a lot of people on, especially in the freedom movement. Is the freedom movement's like, oh, well, it's all we have to do is show up at events. All we got to do is show up at these big rah rallies and everything's going to be fine. And some people have made some personal connections, don't get me wrong. But the fact of the matter is a lot of the leaders or a lot of the people that go there, they show up, they think that they're making a difference, and they go home and they never talk to anybody. They never make any real human connections. And that's one of the things that always baffled me about these things. It's like, why have I not seen freedom barbecues? Yeah. Freedom sledding. No, it sounds silly, but freedom ice skating. Like, those are the types of things where you're not just going there to make a statement. You're going there to build community. You're going to get to know each other. For example, skating is a great one, because say, for example, you encourage freedom people to go to the skate. One of these people comes along. They're not really confident at skating. They're falling on their ass sometimes. And someone who has a bit more experience comes up to them and helps them. You're probably going to make a friend with that person. Yeah. You're not going to make a friend with the guy yelling into the megaphone. Yeah. He's just out for his own ego. And that's what baffles me about all this sort of stuff. Where have we gone wrong, even within the freedom movement, of finding community again?
Yeah, and that's That's the detriment of the freedom movement, and we've talked about this in our previous podcast, criticizing a lot of the groups that and what they're doing, and especially we've talked about the hero complex and how, like, even one of the biggest freedom networks with Rebel News is they really love to show just these heroes, like Julie Ponesse, and they love to show that Trudeau sniper, I forget his name, but. Yeah. And that's all they talk about. Yeah. Like we've mentioned to them, hey, come out to our events and see how we're connecting with students, see how we're chatting with students, see how students feel about this. We get no answer. But it's like as soon as there's some big name comes up, they always jump on that and they start promoting it. But then what does that leave the people who are actually going to make a change? Because Julie Ponesse is great, and I have nothing against her. She's doing what she does, and she's a great speaker, and she talks about the right things. But unfortunately, a lot of people feel like Ponesse is going to save the day.
Yeah. Well, I think the failure is the people that we've turned into heroes, or we're applying this hero title to, or this savior title to, is a lot of them have no experience being leaders, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's not necessarily that they're being. It's not that they're being malicious. Mm-hmm. I don't believe people like Ponesse, as you brought up, or even someone like Byron Brittle is inherently being malicious. They're just trying to get along in life. They're just trying to live their lives and do what they think is the right thing to do. And because they're willing to be a voice, they're willing to be so public, they're getting a lot of publicity. And none of them know how to actually be a leader, though, and how to actually be a hero. And that is not by, serving yourself. You have to serve other people and encourage other people to serve themselves. That is supposed to be what a leader does. I'm shocked sometimes that I don't see Ponesse coming out on Rebel and being like, thanks for giving me a voice, but the reality is I need students to start speaking out. I never hear that from their mouths. And I'm like, why? The only thing I can gather is it's ego. And it's not malicious ego. It's not that these people are like, oh, I'm gonna come together and become this popular person. It's that they just don't really know what to say, and they're getting all this spotlight and all this praise and all this limelight, and their egos are getting boosted, and they're responding accordingly. Mm-hmm. The people, though, on the ground need to turn around and go to these people like Ponesse and be like, thanks for what you're doing, but what can I do? And are you going to make sure that you're actually a voice for what I'm doing and encouraging other people around me to also have a voice? Mm-hmm. Because if all you're going to do is self-promote yourself, then I'm sorry, I'm done. Like, this is one of the biggest issues we saw with someone like Jordan Peterson. I bought his book. I own his book. I've read his stuff. I used to be in his class for a portion of time. And the fact is that he is a smart person. He has a lot of good values. But he does absolutely nothing to encourage other people to raise their voices. And when things got really tough, when his book became super successful, when he got all this fame, when he got an agent and he had all this stuff, even he became less and less enthused in talking about the important issues. All it became is about when's his next tour? When is he going to talk about his next thing? It all became about him. And it's terrible because that's the trap that so many people fall into. They're not leaders. I wish they were, because they are so smart, but they're not leaders. We need real leaders to come around that are going to actually amplify the voice of people and not just amplify their own egos.
Right, so leaders naturally are going to encourage their crowd or their supporters to do the same.
Yeah.
Right, but I haven't seen that from anybody who's been leading these freedom charges, if you want to call that. Nobody's really saying like, hey, you should do this too.
Yeah.
You should go to your local business and sit there maskless when we didn't have the mask, when we had the mask mandates.
Yeah.
None of them ever said any of that stuff.
Nope.
None of them talked much about non-compliance, other than don't take the vaccine. Right?
Yeah.
Like, other than that, there was nothing really no instructions to the supporters. And it's like the supporters, oh, what do I do? Donate to our cause.
and it's disappointing. Like, I cannot like especially with what we've seen through the past 2 years, businesses closing, people losing their jobs, life getting harder. Life is going to get even hard for me come in the near future. How can you ask people who are already having so much difficulty to give money to you? Because the fact of the matter is these people that are down in the ruts are so desperate to do anything. Of course they're going to give you money. They're desperate. But you're taking away from these people that need it in the moment. If someone comes to me and, like, for example, comes to CSONT and is like, I want to help, good. I will talk to you. But I can't beg for that. I don't understand how anyone can beg for that. And that's what it feels like so many of these people are doing.
And yeah, they may do, great things with the funding. And maybe put the funding into, like, fighting the fines or something like that, right? And it actually gets people out of tough situations. But it's like, it's not really encouraging action. It's not encouraging things to really change, because let's just say, a couple thousand people donated to Rebel News to fight the fines, but then they feel like, oh, I already donated, I don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
My fight is over, right? Like, my fight is done. That's for them to handle these problems that I'm having. But unfortunately, no, every individual has to take individual responsibility, which is exactly what conservatism is. And they have to, like you mentioned, take your friend out for a coffee, have a conversation. Tell all your friends, tell your family members about the situations, about the things that are happening, because quite a lot of them probably don't know. And they have no idea, and they might be on your side too, and you have no idea because you're just so scared to talk about it. But if we continue to be scared talking about these things, then it's going to lead nowhere, and they're going to continue to push the agenda. Life is going to get harder and harder, and the governments are going to acquire more and more power over time.
That we're just seeing history repeat itself, unfortunately.
And so how do we encourage people to take action and do all of these things? Because we've been talking about this at CSONT for months now, and we cannot get our own members to get off their ass and start doing things, and even be brave enough to tell their stories. We have to be very, very patient with people is one thing I gathered. But it's like, we're losing time.
Yeah, we are. I mean, I wish I knew the secret sauce to solve this problem. I don't know the secret sauce. I know all the right steps, but how do you get that switch in people's brains to be, I'm not going to care about the momentary issues, I'm going to care about the long-term issues, I'm going to care about the people that support me, not the people that hate me. I don't know how you flip that switch perfectly, but at least when it comes to steps that we can take, as I said, like just becoming friends with everybody you can, trying to talk with your neighbors. If you are in your neighborhood and you don't know who lives next door to you, if you see them walk out the door one day, say hi, introduce yourself, be polite, encourage, and try to build a connection there. And say like, hey, I've been in this community for a number of years, or maybe I've been in this community for a number of months. I want to kind of get to know the people that live around me. And, would you like to have a coffee sometime? Would you like to maybe have a beer? Like, I don't know what your preferences are, how you find things entertaining, but you have to just talk to people. And don't bring up all the controversy, because there is a lot of controversy. Just become good people with people. And over time, what you're going to do is you're going to become an example for them. Because as you build that relationship, then you can kind of just make comments about what you are concerned about. And, they might get a little pushback. But if you're so welcoming and you're so open and you're so happy and you're so helpful and you're trying to build a connection with that person, you're more likely to sway them to your point of view. It's going to take time. It's not something that we are going to solve very quickly. Like, we didn't get here because of just 2 years. We've been dealing with this issue for decades. So it's going to take probably just as long to solve the problem, but we have to start by, swallowing our fears and swallowing our prides and being like, we just have to connect with the people around us. It's going to be tough. And even for me, it's incredibly daunting. I'm not a person that likes to just cold call people and cold talk to people, but it gets easier, and it's going to, in the long term, at least at the end of the day, even if things get worse, you're going to have people around you that'll be there to support you.
That's right. Yeah, when you have a community, then you have like an army behind your back.
Yeah.
And then when shit goes south, it's like they're going to be there to support you because you've been so kind and so nice to them, and you've been so good, like such a great neighbor, such a great friend, or whatever it is. And that's something we've lost. It's like if something goes south, you're on your own.
Yeah.
It's like, good luck.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about your problems.
No.
Nobody cares about anything anymore. And that sucks. But we have to start somewhere. We do have an action plan. It's quite simple. Just kind of, it's simple, but it's hard to do.
Yeah.
The steps are very very easy to predict what we have to do, but it's like not many people are willing to do it. But I hope that as things progressively get worse and worse, and my prediction is they for sure will, because these things are not going away, and just the fact that the provincial mandates were removed, that doesn't mean anything, because the federal mandates have not been removed.
No.
And the culture hasn't been shifted. Like, we talk to students, specifically at University of Toronto, U of T, we go there, and it's like everybody loves socialism.
Yeah.
And we have, because now I kind of switched the topic a little bit from talking about mandates, since they have been lifted, and it just goes nowhere. Oh, mandates are lifted, but goodbye, right? It just goes nowhere. So we started talking about, hey, what about conservative values? What do you think about conservatism? And they fucking hate it.
Yeah.
They want their lives to be controlled,
Mm-hmm.
which is incredibly frustrating, because it's like, dude, this stuff never worked in history.
Yeah.
But then they have an argument of saying, well, it never worked because they didn't have enough people pulled in there. As long as you get enough people to pull all the resources, then it will be distributed equally and everything will be dandy.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to say to those people. Like, my parents have lived in communism, and they've lived through those times, and they know what it's like when all the resources get pulled to one field. You never see those resources again.
Yeah.
And everybody lives poorly except for the small minority that's up at the top controlling all the things. And it's like, oh, sorry, this week you don't have bread, or this week we don't have sugar this week, guys. So good luck.
Well, the fact is the biggest flaw, at least in my perspective, from socialism or communism or any of those collective ideologies, is we have to remember that humans are flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And because humans are flawed, these hyper communalistic approaches are not even communalistic. It's kind of funny, because one of the things I've said, or at least came to this conclusion of recently, is that the biggest collectivists are so hyper individualistic, and the biggest individualists are so collectivist, and it's baffling to me, because it's like, if you talk to a socialist, all they ever focus on is themselves. All they ever focus on is how it affects them, how it affects their immediate surroundings or their immediate issues. Whereas when you talk to a more individualistic-minded person, in the sense of like a conservative or a libertarian, they're like, how does that affect my community? How does it affect my local businesses? Mm-hmm. It's backwards. It's baffling to me, but it seems to be a reality of the situations. But anyway, going back to U of T, the problem that we're seeing there is the result of globalization. Because U of T especially is a predominantly foreign student body. And why do you think people who come from a completely different community don't have a lot of community here? Right? Like, they're not going to, they don't share the same ideologies, they don't share the same values, they don't have the investment in where they're learning, because they just want to get the education, get a job, and move back home.
Yeah.
So what is the actual community that they want to build? There isn't any. So you're not going to be able to convince people like that. Mm-hmm. You need to focus on the domestic body, the domestic students, the people who have immigrated here and live here and want to actually stay here. Those are the people that you need to be focused on and convinced. U of T is going to be tough. Yeah. Because it is such a big, international student body. But you also can't give up, because there are domestic students at U of T. A lot of the people I know that are helping CSUNT are from U of T. So there clearly are people that are there. It's just you have to put in the work, and you'll eventually find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing about like this whole this whole thing is that I mean, you mentioned about domestic students, and the conversation at York University is completely different because we don't have that many international students. There is quite a bit, but like the majority, the major community is domestic students, is Canadians, right? And I always, like, I mean, I'm not against immigration. I am an immigrant myself and my family, but it's like when we were coming here, we went through a selection process, and during the selection process, we were told to uptake Canadian values. They mentioned that you're going to have to give up your, Ukrainian values. You're going to have to give up what you learned in Ukraine, and those things, like, sure, you can talk about them. You can form your own little communities, whatever you want to do. But the Canadian culture, you're going to have to embrace that, and that's kind of the cost that you come at. But what it seems to be now is that all of that has been abandoned by the new Liberal government. They don't give a fuck about Canadian culture anymore. There's no such thing as Canadian culture. They just say, oh, we're just, a mixture of everything.
Post-cultural society.
Post-cultural society. And it's like, oh, everybody's welcome. And, you can delegate Canada however you want. But I think that's such a huge mistake, because this is where we lose our community. This is where we lose these values of like having a barbecue or going for a coffee, because these things, like when you have new people move into the community, they're not going to go to your door with a cake and say, hey, let's celebrate. We just moved in. I want to get to know you. None of that shit happens anymore because everyone is like, oh, they're from there and they're from there and I hate them. It's like...
Some of it's hate, but it's largely fear.
It's largely fear.
I wouldn't use hate, because I don't think, like, vast majority of people, even the people that they say this person is racist towards somebody else, it's fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the fact that they act so different than you, and the fear that their culture is going to change your culture. And that's a perfectly justifiable fear. And there has to be adaptation from people. But, for example, if we actually took it very seriously, like when you were coming to Canada, to say, there's Canadian culture, embrace Canadian culture, embrace Canadians, and if we were being taught in our schools, and if the government was putting advertising and taking the time to educate the local population to value their culture, then when someone did come in, there wouldn't be that fear, because you already have the expectation that that person's moving in not to embed their culture in here. They're moving in because they want to join the community. Yeah. And then there's going to be less fear. But if you want a good example of where they've gotten it right, look at somewhere like Quebec. Quebec it baffled me. So I'm not someone that's traveled around a lot, but I've been at least throughout most of Ontario, and most of Ontario is pretty similar. The cities are all pretty much the same. It's such a diverse number of people, and then outside the cities, it's largely just the average Canadian that you can think of. But when you go to somewhere like Quebec, or you go to somewhere like Montreal, which I had the opportunity to go to, it was amazing that I could jump onto their subway system, and I saw a Muslim lady, and she acted like she was French. She talked like she was French. Yeah, she wore the head covering, but she was from Montreal. She was from Quebec. She was a French Canadian. There was obvious, body language and enthusiasm and confidence and all that. When I go into the subway in Toronto, everyone is different. Everyone is just completely... You get, like, if a bunch of Sikhs come onto to TTC, they only really just intermingle with themselves, and they seem to isolate themselves away from people. And you get, like, all these people that are... When you see school kids come on, and they isolate into their little cliques. You don't see that in Montreal. Everyone is just French. And it's like... Yeah. Where did we go wrong outside of French Canada?
Yeah. We don't educate them on these values anymore. No. I mean, a lot of the times, like for a lot of migrants, the passports are just handed out just because they're here, like just because they made it.
Yeah.
But I know my family had to go through like this whole process of, you have to know the national anthem, you have to know the history, you have to study the history, you have to have a certain level in the language you speak, in English that you speak, or French, whichever one you prefer. And it's like, we had to go through all of that. And my parents know more, like they know more about Canadian culture than some of high schoolers that are coming out.
Yeah.
And it's really sad because I tutor these high school kids, and it's like they have no idea about anything Canadian. No. Nothing. It's like none of these things are taught in school. None of these things are shown on TV or the social media. Everything is about bringing in other cultures and promoting other cultures, except Canada.
Exactly.
And if you're promoting Canadian cultures, you're being alienated and shunned upon because, you don't support diversity.
Yeah. Well, that's the irony. It's like you can have diversity. Look at the United States. The United States is a huge melting pot. You have all these different cultures, all these different communities. But one thing you'll always notice is when you talk to an American, even if they're from, I don't know, Rwanda, or they're from, Thailand, they'll always say, I'm an American. Mm-hmm. And they have that American pride because they came for the country, they came for the culture, and they just brought things as well. And Americans have that pride and have that confidence. So you do still see people going to their neighbors. Yeah. You still see that. Unless you're in some sort of heavy diversity, liberal sort of state, by and large, you have that community still because they have the comfort of what they are. They're comfortable of who they are, and there's no fear because they know the people coming are coming because they want to be Americans.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that's something we have to embrace. That's like kind of a lesson that we have to take from them and from the Quebecers.
Yeah.
And we can instill those values here in Ontario. And where do you begin? Is your neighbors, your local communities, and that's kind of the message that we have for our viewers today. And so, just to conclude this, I wanted to get your projection on the near future, the next maybe 5 to 10 years. This is all going to be speculation, of course, but I love hearing different opinions about what people think and how are they going to prepare for these things, right? We are trying to fight this. We are trying to resist this kind of global narrative of collectivism, right? And that's what's been happening in a lot of the countries like Australia and New Zealand and Europe, Canada, and the United States. All of them are trying to destroy community and bring in these kind of dystopian values of collectivism. Mm-hmm. Let's all gather together, one government, one country, everyone unite. And it all sounds like really cool and dandy, but like that stuff hasn't worked in the past, and everybody's really, really skeptical of this. At least the conservatives are, right? And so, what are your projections for the future, and what do you think? Well, what is the path we're headed towards?
Oh, I mean, at the present moment, the future doesn't look too bright. Unfortunately, things are. Like we have Bill C-36. We have all these crazy ideas that are coming out. We have bank accounts being frozen, people being attacked. We have even like crazy things that we're listening on the news and in businesses. It's like, hey, people who don't wear the mask, don't harass the people that are. It's like, but what about the inverse? Yeah. Like our culture over the last 2 years has been so skewed. It makes me wonder, can we save it even in 5 years? Yeah. Like things, I don't see things inherently getting where we want them, unfortunately. Not in 5 years, maybe in a decade. Mm-hmm. But what we need to do is we need to focus right now on getting communities going, getting people to come together, getting businesses, especially small businesses that have suffered over the last 2 years, to start, reconnecting with their communities. And if we can do that, then at least in about 5 years and over the next few years, regardless of what the government does, we're going to have people to back us up. Mm-hmm. We're going to have people that are still going to employ us. We're going to have people that are going to respect your decision whether you decide to get vaccinated or not. And it'll take time. I don't think 5 years is going to solve the problems, but if we can go down the path of rebuilding this community, then at least 5 years is going to be a little easier than the path we're on presently.
Yeah, and that's something that we've been telling our students that are part of the organization, is that these things are not going to take a few months.
No.
This is not a little like field trip that we're doing, or a little type of mission, so to speak. But we are trying to change culture, and culture change takes a long ass time. So you have to be ready to be in this for a long time, and you have to be ready to commit, because if you don't, then the future could be much darker, and as I would imagine.
Well, whoever has the biggest microphone is going to be the one that ends up leading the charge. So unless people are willing to dedicate themselves to trying to be that larger microphone, it's as I said, the people who are the quietest are usually the smartest, and those people need to learn how to use their voice.
And rebuild their own community, and have that courage to speak up and talk about your story. Fuck the friends who are not going to be listening to you, and who are not going to be supporting you. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's fine. You're going to find like-minded people like us. I mean, there's so many students who are thankful about having a community like ours, because we're able to speak about the things that we all support. And so you're always going to find people who are on your side, but you have to look.
Yeah.
And if you don't look, you're not even in the game, and you're just going to be stuck with people that don't like you anyways.
Yeah.
And so that is the message to our viewers, is that you're going to have to practice non-compliance for the things that you don't like doing, in order for them not to have an effect on your life. And of course, we're going to have to rebuild our communities.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on today to
No
speak
problem.
with us. And to our viewers, we'll chat with you soon.
Sounds good.